You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 39, Speaking Martinique Creole and French. Hello, language lovers. Happy New Year. Happy 2021. And thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast and conversation with multilinguals. Today, my guest is Mickael, founder of FrenchClass NYC, and we're talking about Creole spoken in Martinique and French spoken in France. Actually, in this episode, we're talking about a multitude of topics that include the perception versus reality of people of color in France and the diversity and expression of Black voices in France. I'm asking Mickael about representation of French Caribbean culture in Paris, and we're even discussing the similarities and differences among French, Creole, and French spoken in the diaspora. If you want to hear Mickael's advice for learning the real French in 2021 and for what parts of France to visit that are not Paris, he gives us his advice, and he even tells us one of the biggest achievements that he's experienced since starting FrenchClass NYC. There's a lot happening in this episode on many levels that anyone learning French or is interested in French culture can take away. Big thank you to Mickael for sharing bits of your heritage and language with us. As always, if you enjoy this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe on Instagram and rate and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. Okay, let's chat. So hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here with Mickael. Mickael, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Like all of us in New York City. I'm trying to see the bright side of things. So yeah, I work, I teach, and I'm doing great. Yeah.
Great. I'm so happy that you're here joining me to have this conversation. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
This is a very interesting question because technically I have two languages. I would say my mother tongue is Creole because my family is from Martinique.
Cool.
But they speak French. I mean, French is the official language, but also people do speak Creole. So I grew up learning the two languages. I mean, at home, my mom would speak to me in Creole and I would respond back in French, which is something that a lot of people from the Caribbean in France do. I mean, when they respond to adults, they would respond in French, as a sign of respect. So I have two native language, if I can say so.
That's really cool. And you grew up in France or in Martinique?
I grew up in France.
Okay, really cool. When you were in school in France, what was your experience like with learning other languages? Were there any other languages that you were required to learn?
So when you're in France, you have to learn two languages when you're in junior high school. And back then, which was probably 15 years, 20 years ago or so, or even more than that, 25 years ago. Wow. Anyway, so yeah, when I was in junior high, you had to learn two languages. So of course, English. And then I picked Spanish. And because I was good in languages, I did this advanced course of intensive English. And when I was in high school, I studied in a European high school. Basically, you had course in both languages, like in French and in English. And it's a very international, so you have people from all around the world spending a week in the school. So at a very early age, I would say I was exposed to foreign languages.
Wow.
Yeah.
And was there any specific thing, or was that the specific thing that inspired you to want to learn more than one language?
Oh, wow. This is very, this is how I get personal. I think I grew up in a middle class family. And, when you grow up in this middle class family, parents put so much hope, in you. And as a kid, you want to, do better than your parents. And I knew at a very early age that if I could speak foreign languages, I would be able to get a better job, but also explore the world. So I think it was a combination of curiosity for the world and traveling, but also to have a better career. And also when I was a kid, I had a sister. She's too older than me, and she was taking English, and I was like so impressed and curious with the language. So
Mm.
I think these things triggered my curiosity in English, and when I started taking English class, I had like a little advance compared to my other students because I heard English at home and so on, and
Mhm.
here I am.
Yeah. I think that's really cool. Like for me, I kind of understand that. I think I identify with that a little bit because like but in a different way than you because I wasn't really exposed to so many different cultures and different languages where I grew up and even though I grew up in New York City, which is probably surprising, but I didn't have a lot of friends when I was younger, like very young. And I think we're about the same age, honestly, but I didn't have a lot of friends who came from different parts of the world and spoke different languages, but I was
Hmm.
always struck with this curiosity. And I had this idea, particularly with the French language, that I remember saying to myself, like, if I could just learn French, I could go anywhere. Like, I had this understanding of when I was young, like, if I learned another language, I could see the world. I could have these experiences with people from different places. And I think it just opened up so much for me, you know?
Hmm. To me, that's because I teach French in New York, and I'm always intrigued about people learning French because I think, like, to me, French, even if it's spoken in West Africa and some part of the Middle East, it
Right.
remains like France as opposed to English. To me, English is was the world when I was a kid, and at least this is how uh, we see English when we're in France. And also, the thing that is important in the French culture is the American culture. It's huge. Like I grew
Mhm.
up watching shows like The Prince of Bel Air, Saved by the Bell, all these kind of shows. And also, as a person of color, I mean, a lot of shows with successful Black people. So to me, speaking English meant a lot. Like I grew up
Mhm.
watching the Cosby Show as well, and you had like lawyers, doctors, and I was like, wow, there's something out there in this place in the US where you have to speak English. And so to me, it was more than just a language. It was so much. It was the key to possibilities. And
Right.
yeah.
That's interesting how it's like, yeah, I never looked at it that way, I think, as a native English speaker. I was always looking to like,
Mhm.
other languages to kind of open things up, but I find that people who grew up in other countries, the US culture was so huge. So
Mhm.
that makes sense.
And also, the very interesting thing with the American culture is we can say a lot of good and bad things about the America conquering the world, but there's a lot of positive things, especially for people of color, because when you're in France and back in the days in '90s, in the '80s, we didn't have like representation of in French television. Like all the actors were white, and the only source of representation were through American shows. So like the black culture in France was mostly American culture, and
Mm,
I felt like I had to speak English to really connect to this American culture. And this is why, as of today, you have a lot of black people in France who consider themselves as French, but also as like Black American. They really connect to the American culture, and
mhm.
this connection to me was possible by learning English.
What would you say how would you say the culture of Black Black culture in France, how would you say that it has changed, I guess, from, you know, when you were in junior high school
Mhm.
to like now? Is there more of a Black French or Black Parisian identity?
So
Um,
things change a lot because I remember when I grew up, being people of color, watching people on color on TV was not something common. Like really, like you had to. I mean, we had people of color that would be about some kind of extra in a show or some like stereotypes, with people of color, but we didn't have like a real representation. So the only really, like, as I said, so kind of representation would be in American TV. But I think when I would say over the last 5 years, when I moved to the US and because I go back and forth to France quite often, I realized a lot of positive things happening. We have more and more people of color, and I think it's because this is the influence of the American culture once again as of today. And we have a lot of shows like Insecure, for example, and a lot of people like get inspired by that, and then French people feel like they can create their own French content with people of color. We have a lot of artists like Iseult. I mean, there's many of them who are, really expressing a Black voice. I think this is very important. That's and I think things are happening, but that's something also complex in the French culture. I talk a lot about that in my classes because in France, we don't like to talk about communities because we have this idea. I mean, it's because I studied law later on, and in the French Constitution, we don't see community. We see only French people. We don't care about your race. We don't want to know about your gender. You're all French and you're all equals. And there is, because of that ideology of universalism, like we're all the same, having like I would say a niche community, like the Black community, or the Muslim art kind of stuff. I feel like in France, we're still like, that's not something as natural as it would be in the US. Because I understand in the US how things happen probably because as a reaction to a mainstream white culture, like small group had to create their own, culture.
Yeah.
But in France, it's still like, it's seen as something problematic, something that will destroy, French identity. But there's a lot of talk going on, and it's very, very, very challenging for a Black culture to emerge.
Right. I remember World Cup, and when France won the World Cup, which I will say was much deserved. They were a fantastic team, and I saw a lot of people saying like, the French won, and they won with an all-African team. And I remember a lot of backlash being around that. And I think like here in the States, where we barely pay attention to football anyway, but I think, a lot of us got it. Like we understood what people were trying to say, but a lot of French people were like, no, they're French. And I think that that's, for me, when I first realized like, oh, there is more of this identity of your statehood before your ethnicity. So it's wow.
And I like that you bring that up because this is something also I discuss a lot in class in my beginner course when people introduce themselves. Because in America, I mean, especially in New York, where you have a very strong history of immigration, that people are proud nowadays to be immigrants, which was not the case maybe a long time ago because I have older students, that's another story. But so in France, when you introduce yourself, you would put forward your nationality. You say, I'm French. And where you're from, that's not something you would put forward. And if you do so, I would say, you would say something like d'origine africaine. Je suis français d'origine africaine. I'm French of Black descent, something like this. Because we're not comfortable, putting that forward. And once again, there's this idea of like, we're all French. We don't see color. That's really the philosophy of being France. I mean, it can be critical on one. This, especially when you live in New York, you're like, okay, that's problematic because you cannot have like a Black culture to emerge. But at the same time, I think France were very attached to equality, like equal rights. Like there's a lot of good things that I would say to a certain extent. I mean, it's just a different philosophy. There's no perfect system and so on. And also the thing I would say with the World Cup is that as a French person living abroad, I feel like this is the only time when we are aware of French diversity. People are like, oh, there are people of color in France. I mean, it's very diverse. And especially when you fly to Paris and you take this awful trains from the airport to Paris, you see people of color. I mean, you arrive in Paris, you see people of color. And that diversity, in France, I feel like it's not seen overseas. And one of the things that I
Mm,
do in my job as a teacher, I I do whatever I can to really bring that up. And people in New York love that. They really
right.
love that. This is like life. I'm not trying to be political whatsoever. I'm just trying to depict France in a way that is, accurate.
Right. I think I love that. And I think it's so important because we definitely, I mean, me growing up and being like just obsessed with Paris and always wanting to visit there. And the
Hmm.
times I go to Paris and it's like I see it's like New York. Like I see people who are
Hmm.
everything everywhere, right? But you can watch
Hmm.
a movie, you can watch a television show and you wouldn't think that. So I applaud you for actually making that a point with your students to know like France is just as diverse as any place else. I want to ask you about the Caribbean community in Paris and
Hmm.
or in France or wherever they are seen. And you being from Martinique and your family and doesn't have to be a personal answer, but where is French Caribbean culture reflected, if at all, in Paris? What kind of community is there, and how do people connect with one another, celebrate one another in in French society? Let me tell you, this is why I asked this question. I have a background in the Caribbean as well, and I'm always uh I'm always interested in Caribbean people in the Caribbean, in the diaspora. And so I asked just because one, I'm curious, but two, because like here in New York City, and you notice this, I'm sure, living in Brooklyn,
In
there,
Crown Heights, yeah.
yeah, there's so much representation of the Caribbean. If you feel like you want to have, uh, food from back home, whatever island that may be, you can find it in Brooklyn. If you want to hear the newest soca record or
Hmm.
or dance hall, or you
Hmm.
want to go to a soca party or a dance hall party, you have that. We have the big West Indian parade
Hmm.
every year, and I would say as a Caribbean person of Caribbean descent.
Hmm.
And what I see here is I see a lot of representation. I see a lot of, I mean, anywhere you go, you see, Jamaican food is all over
Hmm.
the place, or, you see like Bajan rum in every liquor store. And
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering if there is that
Oh
amongst
no.
the Caribbean community
Oh no, no,
in
no,
Paris.
no.
Like I
Unfortunately,
didn't mean to ask you like an existential, like what does it feel like, but I'm just
yeah.
wondering like amongst
No.
yourselves, do you celebrate independence? Do you celebrate like, or not
No,
independence
no.
obviously, but like is there anything like that or
Oh, yeah, yeah, now I see. This is another excellent question. And I will respond to it using an anecdote in class, because one time in class we were talking about slavery because there was Black Lives Matter movements, and I realized how ignorant I was, about the history of my island, about Martinique and so on, and I think because in France we don't have that acknowledgement of minorities, of cultures and group, and therefore we don't have anything similar to what you have here. Of course, you might find some random parades and some restaurants, some Caribbean restaurant, but this like sense of communities getting together or celebrating, having a parade
yeah.
and saying we're proud of being Caribbean. No, we don't have this uh, thing, and it's, yeah, now that she's saying that, I mean, why not? That's so sad, yeah, we don't have something similar. I'm sure if someone listening to you will be like, yeah, we had this thing and on, but it's not comparable to what you have in Brooklyn. I went to like many years, I went to the parade, and it's a big celebration. People are, and I think also something that I want to say with New York is that, or the US, or maybe the big cities, is people have the sense of pride. I'm
Mm,
proud to be gay, I'm proud to be Black, and, just proud of being who I am. And I feel like in France, we don't have that. we don't have something similar. Like sometimes you can have like on Bastille Day, like we're a proud citizen, we have parties, but we don't have this feeling of being proud of being who we are, and I don't think we have anything similar. And unfortunately,
Would you say that there are like, and I'm just thinking of my own like trips to France. Like if I wanted to have like Caribbean food, are there restaurants that I could go to?
I, I'm laughing because my mom is a caterer and we spent years trying recipes.
Uh-huh.
So we are extremely picky. And I have to say, anytime I would go in a restaurant in Paris, I would be very disappointed for many reasons, because the rent is expensive, the food is not fresh. It's like I know all the reasons why it's not good. And I think you have to go, you need to know friends who can cook you something. Like,
Mm,
yeah, I mean, this is Caribbean food to me, it's not something it's something, it's a food from the heart, like it's so kind of soul food kind of. And
hmm.
most of the places I went to Paris were like mediocre, so you might end up being disappointed.
Oh
And
man.
yeah, maybe because my mom is a good chef, so
Yeah, you're lucky. You're
yeah.
So talking about Creole,
Hmm.
um, and you grew up speaking Creole in your house and with your family. I guess I
Hmm.
wonder like what is that like if you're living in a French speaking country
Hmm.
and your elders are speaking to you, or your siblings, whoever, is speaking to you in Creole, and then
Hmm.
you go outside and you don't have that, and you're having to speak French. What is that? Um, what is that like? Do you find that you maybe how do I say this? Do you find that Creole becomes this like really personal language that you only share with certain people?
Hmm.
Do you I don't know, do you grow up like
So in my own experience, I would say Creole, it's a very personal slash intimate language,
hmm,
because that would be the language that I would hear only from my mom, and with my brothers and sisters, we would not speak between ourselves in Creole, just in French. And it's very interesting because if you spend some time in my house and you're just being like a little mouse and observing what's going on, like my mom is super chatty and she was speaking Creole and super fast, like 1,000 words in a minute, and then I respond in French.
mm,
And so Creole to me, it's a very intimate language. And the only occasion where I would speak Creole outside of the house would be maybe with my brothers and sisters, like in a coded language. You want to say, bad stuff about someone, you don't want to be understood. You would speak Creole. Same thing with my mom, but it's more like a coded language, like a very intimate language. But it's not a language that I would speak to with another person from Martinique. And also the reason why is that there's a lot of insecurities with the Creole. Like my understanding of a Creole is perfect, like because it's my mother tongue, but because I never spoke it, so it's kind of like extremely rusty.
mm,
And also talking about Creole, because being a West Caribbean, growing up in France, you have a very different experience with your cousins or family living in the Caribbean islands who speak and understand Creole.
right.
And anytime we go on vacation there, and I would try, or my brothers and sisters would try to speak Creole, we would have a terrible French accent, and people would make fun of us, and that would be
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't have that. I don't practice much Creole.
Hmm. Do you find that when you're trying to express yourself in a certain way, or trying to express yourself um you know do you ever turn to Creole? Does Creole feel like the proper expression for like happiness or sadness or frustration or
Oh yeah.
yeah.
And I would say that because I speak several languages. I speak English, French, Creole,
Hmm.
and I do a lot of translation in my work, from French to English and English to French. But sometimes when I have my own thoughts and thinking, sometimes you have Creole expressions. You
Right.
cannot translate them because these words are, it's because Creole is a very, I would say, a vulgar language. Like it can be very graphic, the Creole spoken in the Caribbean islands. And it doesn't have the same, if you translate it literally, it's not what it's supposed to mean, and it's because there's so many emotion attached to it. Like my grandmother used to speak Creole, and there's all these curse words that you would say, and they're funny. And yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I would use Creole like in my own thoughts sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's really cool how people who speak more than one language, it's like certain languages feel appropriate for certain emotions or
Hmm.
expressions. And I don't think I've gotten there yet personally, but I always like to
Hmm.
ask people like, what does that feel like? Because to me, it seems like such a cool thing that like, um, what emotions feel appropriate for what parts of your life.
Hmm.
Um, so tell me, just talking about the language, do you have any examples maybe of something that like, I, a difference between Parisian French or France French
Hmm.
and Martinique Creole, like for people who are listening and haven't heard, and I think I like to I'm asking this question because we've said it's Creole, so people listening should know that it's Creole, but um there are different French Creoles in the Caribbean
Hmm.
as well. So I would love it if you maybe have an example, so people listening can hear a difference between French and Creole.
To me, the way the languages are in my head, like I don't even do like comparison or translation. It's just coming out like raw, like okay, this is Creole, then I switch to French. But I
Hmm.
never work on translating it, or I never studied like Creole, like spend some time doing some reading and so on. Like if I want to say something in Creole, like how you doing, that would be like ça ou fait, and I don't see the connection with French. Would be comment ça va.
Hmm.
I think we would use different verbs. Ça ou fait, fait means the verb is faire, which means to do or to make, and ça va is aller, like as it going. So I feel like there's not so much connection, even if Creole, like the Creole spoken in many Caribbean islands, comes from French. There's a lot
Hmm.
of French connection to it, but I never really thought about really connecting the words with Creole and French. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's good to note because, you know, French, like many other languages that have traveled around the world, it changes, and it really depends on
Hmm.
who's speaking it and what purpose they're speaking it for. And I love that because I don't think that people readily think of think of it that way.
Hmm.
I mean, years ago I was teaching and I had a young man. I had like they were 8-year olds, and his family was from Haiti, and he was he was one of my more what should I say, misbehaved students. And um this was my own ignorance, but when I would try to talk to him, when I first met him, I would try to talk to him, and I would say little words to him, little things to him here and there, and I would say it in French because at the time my French was much better than it is now.
Hmm.
And sometimes he would laugh at me. That's what he would do. He would laugh at me, and he would say like, you're not saying it right, or you talk funny. He would say I talk funny. And then I realized, I went and I looked it up because I wanted to look up like how can I talk to him, because I knew that his first language at home was,
Hmm.
his family was from Haiti. So then I said, "Oh, wow, Haitian Creole is so different from French." Like I just didn't know. you
Hmm.
know. So what I started doing with him was I just like would make a list of French words, or I would get some pictures, and I started asking him like to teach me how
Hmm.
to say like horse in French, or to say hat, or
Hmm.
how to say it in Creole. So um to me, that's where I learned that it's kind of like, it's not kind of, but it derives from French in some way, but it's really
Hmm.
not connected at all. So
Yeah.
I just want people to know and learn from my mistake. So thank you so much for mentioning that and for pointing it out. And it makes me wonder, like, you know, do you know, with French spoken in parts of Africa and, maybe Canada and other parts of the world where French is spoken, how how different is it? Like, how do you notice French speakers able to communicate and understand one another?
Oh, that's interesting because I used to travel a lot before, and I've been to Canada, like Montreal and Quebec, and I've been to Senegal many times, Mauritania for work, and um, and also the thing with French, before I say which one is which, is that the French spoken in France sometimes can be very different from the French, the academic French, because we have this thing that I spend time on in my class, talking about the differences between the formal, standard academic French that people study in schools in the US or anywhere else. And then there's the French spoken on the street. And when it comes to the informal street French, we have like many, different styles, and
Hmm.
sometimes you can add some slang and so on. But talking from my traveler experience, I would say when it comes to Canada, if I stays in Montreal, like downtown Montreal, I can understand them. But as soon as I leave the city and I speak to people from the rural Quebec, we are lost in translation. It's because
Mm.
the accent is so thick. I remember so many times they would say things. I'd be like, what the hell are they saying? And then I'd be like, oh, you're saying this. And also the French spoken in Canada, that's the French spoken many centuries ago when the French settled there. So that's a very, I would say, don't get offended, listeners, like a very rustic
Yeah,
French.
yeah.
And but we're talking about the French spoken in West Africa. I got to say that the French spoken there is way better. I say that all the time in my class. It's way better than the average French spoken in Paris.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, from my experience, I talked with a lot of educated officials in my jobs, and the French would be so like elegant. They would use a lot of these like old-fashioned words, and also the pronunciation.
Mm.
And also, because sometimes I have in class students asking me recommendations to study French abroad, and I'd be like, if you can, just try to go to West Africa. I mean, for culturally speaking, it's interesting, but also the way people speak, they speak slower, they enunciate way more, and and they don't do the bah, when you listen to a native speaker, it's like finish your sentence, So that's they have to me they speak a more sophisticated French, and I don't have any challenge understanding them.
Hmm.
The pronunciation of the R's, for example, is different. It will be rolled. They will say Paris instead of Paris, but
Mm.
that's totally fine with me.
I never would have known that. That's so interesting.
Hmm.
That's really cool. I went to Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire once,
Hmm.
but I was so young and I didn't understand a single word of French, but I remember hearing people say, like, there's something about the way that they speak French in Ivory Coast that's like so like more French than France, you know?
Hmm.
And but I had no way of knowing that was true. I didn't know if it was like people were just um teasing or if people were being
Hmm.
serious. So that's really cool. I never I learned something today. Thank you.
But when I say they speak a better French, it's more like the French that they speak on a regular basis. It's
Hmm.
closer to the academic standard French, which is
Yeah.
easier to understand. The French that you hear in your app like Duolingo or Babbel, like, oh, you're like, oh my God, I understand everything. And when you go to Paris, you're like, what the hell are they saying? So
Yeah.
that's more in that sense I say they speak a better French because it's more standard and they speak slower and they
Hmm.
don't like eat up syllables.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I know that I definitely struggle with because even when I watch a show where there's a lot of colloquial French,
Mm.
like the last one I watched was Family Business. Have you seen that one?
On Netflix?
Yeah.
No, no, no. I haven't seen it. No.
Yeah, it's like, I can kind of follow a show like Call My Agent,
Mm-hmm.
but family business was like nothing but, like, to my ear, just nothing but just like street French. And it's the same thing like when I listen to French hip hop, it's like I have no
Oh
way of
yeah.
understanding that because
Ah, same for me.
I mean, I love it and I listen to 90s French hip hop all the time, but
Yeah.
I don't understand a single word that MC Solar is saying. And it kind of like breaks my heart a little bit. But like, how would you say, or do you have any like tips for someone who kind of, they maybe they have studied the academic French in
Mm-hmm.
school and like they go to Paris and they're lost? Like, what could somebody do?
So the thing that I do in my class, I spend a fair amount of time on the very common, uh, I would say modification of like standard French to informal French. Like we spend like how to say I am. I am is je suis, that's what you learn. But in reality, the je become a J apostrophe, like je suis, and become suis.
Mm,
Suis is je suis. You listen to Duolingo, they're always going to say something like je suis. And people are like, oh yeah, I understand. And when they go to Paris, le je suis becomes suis. And so we work on these very common, like, the most common like way of pronouncing things in French in an informal way. And I would say, so talking about how to understand the real French, one thing I say to my student is that you should focus on global comprehensions because most of the time you're not going to understand like every single word in the sentence. And same thing for me with living in New York. But you need to understand the key words and this key like informal French way of saying things like like suis and stuff like this.
mhm.
And it's not that hard. It's really a process. And at first, it's going to be a lot of guessing but immersion is great, really, like spending some time cutting yourself from anything that can be English related for like maybe 2 weeks if you can, and you
Mhm.
will be surprised to see the results. Like I have a lot of students, wealthy students, who spend like half of the year in their pied-à-terre in Paris,
Wow.
and when they come back, they make amazing progress, but you really
Mhm.
need to disconnect yourself from anything American.
So tell me all about French Class NYC. How did you get started? Tell me what your students are like and what are some of your biggest successes?
Oh, okay.
And what are some of the reasons that your students typically have for wanting to learn French?
Oh, good. All right. So FrenchClass NYC is my business that I started in January this year, right before the pandemics. So
Wow.
that was like a shock. So because when I arrived to New York, long story short, the best job for me, the best option was to teach French. So I worked in different schools. I worked at Alliance Française, and then I worked at Idlewild. And then after 4 years working in different places, I thought it was about time to have my own business. So I opened it in January 2020. And it was doing great, actually. People followed me, and I had like, students that I've had for years. They, came with me in that journey. And March happened with
Yeah.
COVID-19. And literally had to switch my my classroom from online classes in a weekend. So I had to. Good things I had a guest room in my house which was empty, so this guest room was turned into my office, and I was ready to start on the following week. So at first, I had to say they had some adjustment, and then things went super well, and here I am today. So yeah, so talking about my classes, so I do two kind of, I teach mostly to for these classes, like group classes, but also I have private lessons, like one-on-one. And I think it's a very interesting populations of New Yorkers that I have. In my most advanced levels, I have like hardcore Francophile. I
Mm,
mean, these people are like retired, they're journalists, they're a producer, they're like writers, and they have a lot of times and they love traveling and they love French culture.
mhm,
And I have to say that in this class, I'm having like wonderful times every week. And during an hour and a half, we discuss, French literature, and I'm trying to mix like classic French literature, but also like the new writers, including a lot of diversity. People love the fact that we talked about, writers of colors, writers from the Caribbean islands, writers, LGBTQ writers as well.
Hmm.
So this is the kind of things I do in my class. So there's like I would say my class is divided half. There's discussion, conversation, but there's also like a more theoretical class where we dig into grammar and vocabulary and so on. And then I would say in my other classes is more like traditional classes where you learn French from beginner to advanced beginner levels. And talking my
Uh,
biggest achievement, I think I had the chance to work with, I would say, a lot of different people. I think my biggest achievement was one of my students that I had in my group classes. She one day she asked me if I would be interested in working with her, translating her mom's journals. Her mom was Jewish. She passed away,
mm,
and when she was a kid, and she grew up in Belgium, she had to hide during the war, and then she had a journal, and she used to journal in French. And after the war, the mom moved to New York, and she had an American life, speaking English and so on. And a few years ago, the mom died, and maybe a couple of years after the mom passed away, my student found her mom's journal, and so the student asked me to help her translating her mom's journal, and we did that. Uh, I mean, during private lessons,
right.
and I got to say, this has been the most. My biggest achievement in New York because it was first thing first. Her mom was an amazing writer. And I told she should be published, but that's another story. But it
Mm,
was so personal what we were doing. Like my student was discovering parts of her mom's life she had no idea during the war, and also it was also an historical document that I had in my hand. Like it was the Second World
yeah.
War, explained through the eyes of a young girl. I had goosebumps doing this work with that students, and once she got the translation done, she made a documentary out of it, and the documentary went to a couple of festivals, and then COVID-19 happened, so things got slowed down. But that was like an amazing achievement, and we went to Princeton to talk about this amazing work, and that was like an amazing achievement. And to me, it's more important than the private lesson that I did with some celebrity because I worked with some celebrity back then. But to me, doing this kind of personal historical work was like, I mean,
Yeah.
even speaking about it, it's like I feel still
Yeah.
emotional. Yeah,
That's like a once in a lifetime
yeah.
opportunity where you really had
Hmm.
a chance to make a difference in someone's life
Hmm.
and wow, that's incredible. Well, I wish her a lot of success with the film.
Hmm.
In spite of COVID, um I hope that she's able to publicize it and get people to see it.
Hmm.
Um So, for anyone who is interested in taking French class with you, please let us know where we can find you.
Oh, it's French Class NYC.
Hmm.
That's my website, and also I have my Instagram account where I share like the informal French. So on my account, I have to say one thing on my Instagram account. My account is because there are many French teachers online. I decided to specialize on informal slang French, so that's just one aspect of my teaching because most of the time I would say my classes are pretty I would say academic and formal, but I still think that learning informal French through my Instagram is a great way to impress native speakers.
Hmm.
That's the thing.
Well, that's great. I'm going to add that information into the show notes so that anybody who's listening can just click really quickly and find you and hopefully will be interested in taking a lesson with you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Um, so I want to ask you, and we talked a little bit about this before, but you know, we both come from pretty diverse cities and have, captured the imaginations of people all over the world. What are some things about Paris and French culture that you would want people to know that they may have the wrong idea about? And on your website, You also mentioned that France is full of contradictions, and
Hmm.
what are some of those contradictions that you see in French culture?
I think the thing that that comes into my mind right now would be the lack of diversity. That's something that I think French is not. That's probably the biggest cliche people have. Like people, and a lot of time I have students who went to France for the first time, and when they came back, they were like, "Oh wow, I had no idea there were people of color in France." Or also when I worked at Adawile, I remember a student would be surprised to see maybe a black teachers
Mm,
teaching. I think that would be the diversity. Something that I hear a lot also about France is that, oh, France is racist or France is whatever things and so on. And I want to say that probably, yeah, maybe in France there's some racism, but I don't see France as any less racist than the US or any of this place. I think France is complex, and and I want to say that to me, I would say that France is a very complex story. There are multi layers. There are racism, but also people of color trying to say they are out there. But there are also a lot of positive things happening also in France, and I wish the mainstream French culture being exported abroad would reflect that.
mm,
But yeah, I think that would mostly be the diversity that I wish would be more present in people's mind when it comes to France. And also the thing I would say also when it comes to France is that I like to say that France is not only Paris.
mm,
um, this I think that this is clear for most of my students, but sometimes I have people who think that Paris is France, and I think in France you have other places. And I like to mention Marseille in the south of France,
mhm.
which is a place that that I've been many times. I talked a lot about Marseille. It's a very diverse city in France. And many of my students went there, they loved it. And they were like, wow, I had no idea that France could be that, original and, and diverse as well.
Right, right. I think that's worth noting. And you're right. I think a lot of people, it's just easy. It's easy to think about Paris and not think about the rest of France. And I think
Hmm.
that's unfair, because there is so much. And I think what's interesting to me also is how many different dialects there are
Hmm.
within France. And you can go to different parts of the country and it's not
Hmm.
going to be the French that you hear um in the movies or on TV. And I think it's underrated.
Hmm.
And I agree with you. I've not been to Marseille. I would love to go to Marseille someday. But do you have any other non-Parisian recommendations for people?
I think France, I don't want to brag, but the entire country is amazing. It's
Yeah.
like ideally, if you for people who wants to have a very interesting experience in France, if you've been to Paris so many times, if you can drive, I would rent a car and drive all around France. I used to live in Toulouse before I
Mm,
moved to New York, and Toulouse was like insanely gorgeous.
wow.
Yeah, I used to have like this amazing apartment downtown the city. I was paying way less than a bedroom in New York. I mean, it's a quality of life also. Because the thing I want to say about France as well is it's not so much about seeing his monuments and so on. Of course, there are many of them to see, but there's also um, an experience. It's going in a restaurant, like going in a cafe and having that kind of experience, that kind of like things you cannot really describe, like you cannot really get in a picture in one city. It's just about experiencing the country. I would say all around France you have very different um, the geography is different, the food is different, because I was born in Brittany on the west coast, on the very
Mm-hmm.
deep part of France. The food there is amazing. This is
Yeah.
one of my favorite place for pastries, I would say. But I also like the other part of France, in Strasbourg, by the border of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, France, the entire country has so much to offer. Like it's a small country, but I think when you think about France, you should have a different perspective, from an American perspective, because I feel like here, if you drive for miles, you're not going to experience much difference. As opposed to France, if you drive from Paris and you go to Marseille, I mean, the road's going to be like so different. Like it's a completely different type of weather. It's a different people, different culture, and so yeah, I think that would be my recommendation. Marseille, Toulouse, Nice. I mean, the entire country is great, really. I cannot pick one place, really.
So we should go all over the place
Yeah,
and
and move
experience it
there.
all and move there.
Exactly.
I didn't get to ask you, I'm going to ask you now, even though it might be a bit of an afterthought, but you speak a couple of other languages,
Hmm.
aside from Creole and English. You mentioned to me before that you have experience with Portuguese, Japanese, and Spanish.
Yeah.
What has it been like for you learning those languages?
Okay, so I speak Creole and French, my mother tongue. Then I learned English and Spanish in school, and I was pretty good in these two languages, like English and Spanish in schools. And then I stopped practicing it, so my Spanish is kind of rusty.
Mm.
And lately, I learned Portuguese because I went to I've been to Brazil many times, and the first time I went there, because I didn't speak the language, I kind of feel like Emily in Paris, but in Brazil. And my thought was like, I felt like I was missing out so much for not speaking the language because I had
Mm.
friends there, they were Brazilian, and unfortunately, the people that I knew in Brazil were not good speakers. And the culture in Brazil, it's amazing. Like we could do another podcast on another episode on Brazil, but so much is happening there, and I felt like I needed to learn Portuguese to connect to people. So I'm learning Portuguese right now, and also I learned Japanese, but I was not a serious student because I was going to Japan and I just took a few classes. But
Hmm.
I'm more like into Portuguese now because I want to
Yeah.
go back to Brazil.
How is your progress?
I would say it's very complicated to start anything right now with the pandemics, to be honest. And that's
Mm.
why I really admire my student who have taken classes with me since March and hasn't stopped, because I'm trying, but it's very hard to do anything during the day. I mean, people who are in
Yeah.
New York or anywhere in the world struggling with the COVID, it's just you're like, okay, I'm going to focus on work. I'm going to focus on being okay during the day. And I don't
Mm.
want to put myself too much pressure. And learning languages will wait, but it's on top of my to-do list. Like I really
Yeah.
want to learn Portuguese,
Yeah.
but the thing you mentioned earlier about the headspace, like this is important. Like if you don't feel like it, if you're like stressed, not having confidence and so on,
Hmm.
I think it's better to wait and to have the right mindset to start it. So that's the goal, Portuguese.
Yeah. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that. You can do it
Oh yeah, yeah,
because
no
you've
worry, yeah.
already you've already got some other languages
Yeah.
under your belt. So I think you'll be fine. I have one more question for you, but I just want to say that I'm really glad that we had this opportunity to talk. And um, one reason why I really wanted to talk to you about French is because everything we've been talking about in this episode about representation, about being Black in France and Blackness, and that kind of understanding what diversity is, I don't think that we see very much of that, especially in the US.
Hmm.
And I think that, when I saw you on Instagram, I thought, wow, this is really cool because, like you said, there are so many French teachers on Instagram, but
Hmm.
I only see one person who looks like you. I only see one person who looks like me
Hmm.
in this way, in this venue. And I really thought it would be an important conversation that we could have to discuss the language and to discuss being Black as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always happy to have this conversation with people because I want people to see us. I want people to see what we're
Yeah.
doing and to
Mm-hmm.
realize that, you could have 100 people doing the same thing, but how many of them are Black? How many of them, you know, look like me? And and I think that that's important and that matters. And to somebody like me, growing up and always wanting to learn to speak French, I didn't see Black French teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really see any French teachers until I was in high school, but even at that point there was still this veil of whiteness that was there. So I think what you're doing in my eyes is phenomenal, because there will be kids out there, young people out there, or even people our own age out there who can see you and say, okay, well, he's doing it, he's a Black man who speaks French, and you know I want to get in on that too. I want to, so I personally thank you for representing and for your
Oh, thank you so much.
representation, and I think what you're doing is so important. And I wish you all the success, like all the success. And
Oh,
you're coming up on 1 year, so congrats.
thank you so much. Thanks.
Yeah. So the last question, and I ask this question at the end of every episode. I like to ask this question just for a little to end on a fun note. Um, do you have any jokes, swear words, tongue twisters, slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or advice in French or in Creole that you'd like to share?
Um, I'm thinking. Oh, there's a word that I like to share in French that so many people can use. Is a synonym of aimer is kiffer. Kiffer in French. Je kiffe le vin, je kiffe la France. Kiffer means to like, but it's a word that comes from Arabic. And
Mm,
kiffer it originally means like cannabis, but that's a very common word. Like everybody use the word is to really be into something. Like, oh, je
mm,
kiffe le pain. If you say that to a native speaker, he's going to be very surprised because he doesn't expect you to use that word. Kiffer, ou
ki-
je kiffe la musique, ou je kiffe, it's like I dig it or I love it. And that's my word, and people like it. And it's try it too next time you go to France, and people will be like, oh wow. Maybe I have to be careful maybe if I speak French in front of that person because you know the real French. Yeah.
So kiffer
Kiffer.
is the verb,
Ki-
but like je kiffe is like, if you like something or
yeah, je
you're
kiffe
into it.
the je kiffe is the verb conjugated. You're saying I'm digging
Right,
it.
right.
Je kiffe. Right.
Okay, very cool. Um, I got to keep that in mind, like you said, so that I can fool people and they'll think that I know more
Next time
French
in
than I
France,
do.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, Mickael, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And I really enjoyed talking to you for this past hour. Um, really quickly, what would you say? Don't think about it too hard, but what is the best way to say goodbye?
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Right.
Au revoir et merci. And thank you for talking to me. And I'll be talking to you soon.
Merci, merci. Au revoir, Elle. Bye bye. Take care. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye.